All right, test, can you guys hear me? All right, excellent. So welcome to Stir Trek. Stir Trek is an awesome conference. It's one of my favorites of the year. I mean, isn't it cool that we're all here in a movie theater and then we get to go and watch a really cool movie afterwards too? It's pretty awesome. So I definitely love this conference. So anyways, thank you for coming to my talk. This talk is about monetization, but it's not about monetization that you probably think about. Like when most people think about monetization, they're thinking, apps and websites and games, web applications and things like that. But this talk is more about monetizing yourself. And what that means is it's about figuring out ways to improve or increase the value that you're providing, and of course, being rewarded for that. That's kind of the goal, right? That's why we do what we want to do. And it's also about kind of figuring out, getting to a point where you have more free time to do the things that you really want. Because that's what everyone's dream is, right? Everyone wants to make the next Facebook, and then you can live off that for the rest of your life. You don't have to work a day again, and then you're all set. Though actually, most people that make those apps, they end up getting overwhelmed and working 80-hour weeks anyway, so maybe that shouldn't be the goal. So anyways, a little bit about me. So my name is Ondrej Balas. I'm a Microsoft MVP in C#, or I think it's .NET now. Also writer for Visual Studio Magazine, so I write about a lot of .NET stuff. So if you're a .NET developer, I write about dependency injection and regular expressions and all kinds of really fun things like that. I'm also the owner of a small company, Use Tech Design, just me and a few guys. And so I'm from Michigan, so I get to do the hand thing, right? So we're from like down here. I know you guys in Ohio hate when we do this, but so I'm from the Troy area there. And as part of being involved in that, I end up writing a lot of software for various businesses. So it's actually really cool because I'm exposed to so many different industries. Manufacturing, finance, and logistics, kind of the big ones right now, but all kinds of stuff. And more relevantly to this talk, I'm also a serial entrepreneur. So I know I look really young, but I'm actually 31. I started my first company 14 years ago when I was 17 years old. Just kind of got out of high school. My parents, so I finished high school. My parents were like, hey, you need to go get a job. And I was like, why? That doesn't sound fun. That kind of sucks. But they made me go out and, so I started looking for a job. And everyone, they want you to get there at a certain time and, wake up in the morning and all that kind of stuff. And then the jobs I was looking for, they barely paid you anything. And I was like, man, I don't know, this doesn't sound very fun. I don't want to do that kind of job. So I was like, well, why do I do that? Why don't I just figure out what I'm good at? Now, software had been a passion of mine for a very long time. But at the time, so I didn't think anyone would actually pay me to write software. Because I was like, who was going to pay me to sit in a chair? That doesn't make any sense. You have to do something, right? Because that's kind of the way I was raised, is you have to do something to get to that point. So rather than starting a software company, I actually started a company doing computer repair, because that was, I guess, the thing to do back then. So this is like, 2001. And I'd go and I'd post like little flyers on the wall in the grocery store, and I'd go on Craigslist. That was big back then, still kind of is, I guess. And I did all kinds of things like that to kind of do the computer repair thing. And it actually worked out pretty well. So I only had to work a few hours a week, and I made as much money as my friends working at McDonald's and wherever else they were working. And most importantly, it didn't mess with my rating schedule. So you guys know what I'm talking about, right? Did a lot of MMO. I think it was EverQuest back then that I played way too much. But that was the main drive for me, was like I didn't want to work because I needed to raid. I had to kill dragons. That was really important to me back then. So anyways, as I kind of kept going and doing these things, I kind of came up with this philosophy. And then this talk is kind of about that philosophy I came up with, which is this. Making money or having fun. You should be doing one of those two things. If you're not doing one of those two things, well, what are you doing, right? So I have this problem where I read Reddit way too much. And Reddit is, so anyone that reads Reddit, you know how that goes, right? Especially if you install that never-ending Reddit plugin, you just keep on going and you're like, oh, man, it's 3 o'clock, I got here at 10 and I should do something. So kind of what I try to do is I try to not do things like that too much, right? I try to always kind of look at myself kind of introspectively or whatever and kind of see, hey, is what I'm doing right now providing value? Am I making money? Am I having fun? I mean, if it's kind of fun, it doesn't really count. It has to be making money or having fun. And using this philosophy, I actually kind of went through and I got into other businesses, right? Every time there was an opportunity, I would seize that opportunity because at the time, all my time was spent having fun, and I didn't do so much of the making money part, which kind of becomes challenging once you actually want to like move out of your parents' house. You had to do more of that kind of thing. So got involved in various businesses, and actually the way I got transferred into software or switched over into software was, so what did I do? Oh yeah, so, sorry, I'm forgetting the story. So I had this client of mine, and I did computer repair for them, and he kept saying, hey, well, do you know anyone that writes software? And I was like, what do you mean? I write software. Software is awesome. I love writing software. But wait a second, you're going to pay me to write software? No way. So I did that. I started writing some software for him. And then before you know it, he was like, well, do you want to have a job writing software? And I was like, wait, no, that doesn't sound very fun. Because when he said he wanted me to have a job, what he actually meant was, I want to pay you less, and I want you to be here when I tell you to be here. That doesn't sound fun. You know, I still had dragons to kill, and it doesn't really work out, especially if you're on the East Coast, and you know, you got to play with people on the West Coast. They're going to bed at midnight, so I'm going to bed at 3. I can't be somewhere by 7 or 8. That doesn't work, right? It conflicts with my schedule. So I still kind of kept thinking about everything in the terms of making money or having fun. And I just kept saying no to all these like job offers from him. You know, come be here at 9 a.m. No. And eventually he offered me a partnership in the company. So I took that, and then that's kind of how things started rolling for me. And he's also a serial entrepreneur. So I kind of learned a lot about business from him. He was like my mentor for a very long time. Still is, you know, still a partner of that company to this day. And that's a financial services company. We use software to do a whole bunch of really interesting and cool things, especially machine learning now. It's becoming pretty big. So anyways, I kept on doing that, and I kept on growing. And every time an opportunity would come up, I would look at, or I'd think about my philosophy up here, and I would say, oh, does this fit with my philosophy? And if it did, I would take the opportunity. So I've been involved in businesses from pretty much every single aspect. I mean, I've been just, you know, a small part of it. I've been the director of a company. I have a new IT firm I started last, I think, September. And in that firm, I'm only an investor, an owner, right? I have no say in day-to-day stuff. I don't even know what goes on. I just, you know, once a month I get a report, and hopefully I get a check instead of having to cut a check. So I just kind of kept on doing those things and kind of getting into business and figuring out ways to make money but also have fun. My wife hates this, by the way, because she'll be like, well, honey, do you want to do the dishes? No, it's not making me money, and I'm not having fun doing it, so I really don't think I should do that. So she hates that, and it doesn't work really well. So anyways, moving on past this. So when I say making money, having fun, and all that kind of stuff, it all comes to this, right? This is money. This is what money's all about. Of course, we'd more prefer to have this, but this is kind of more realistic of what we actually have. So what is money? How do we get to money? And why is money something that we want? And how do we get there? That's kind of what this talk is about. And it's also about my stories, my personal experiences. I'm going to talk about a whole bunch of different things, and not all of it's going to be applicable to everyone, but I'm hoping that some of the things that I do or have learned over time, you know, I'm hoping that everyone will at least be able to take 1 or 2 things out of this talk and maybe get to a point where you're either making more money or having more fun, preferably both. All right? So money came to be a long time ago, and I'm sorry for the low-res image. I couldn't really find, wow, it's really low-res on this giant screen, geez. I couldn't really find a good image of this. But this all started in the bartering time, right? So many, many moons ago, back in the ancient times, and I don't have exact years and dates and whatnot, but people used to trade things. So if I had, if I had a bunch of carrots, and maybe what you had was a bunch of grain, we could trade, right? Because I want grain. Because my carrots are going to go bad, but the grain will probably last a lot longer, especially if you mill it or whatever. So people just traded for things they needed, right? Problem with that, I mean, there's a few problems with that. First problem with it is that if you produce something that goes bad, well, you should probably trade it really quickly. And hopefully the person that has what you want wants what you have. But that's not always the case. So you'd end up with people like me with my carrots. You know, I want to go trade for some raspberries. Hey, I really want some raspberries. It would really make my dinner a lot better if I could just eat a bushel of raspberries. But they're like, well, I don't need your carrots. Oh, man, well, what do you need? Oh, I need wheat. Grain. Well, okay, so I got to find the guy that wants grain. Oh, he doesn't want carrots either. That's unfortunate. So you end up trading around, you end up trading for things you're hoping that someone wants, and it ends up just being a mess, and it's just difficult, right? Now keep in mind, this is from a time when something like 98% of the world population was involved in producing or growing food in some way, right? So anyways, moving back to that. So if I had a bunch of bananas and I couldn't trade them for something, then they would end up going bad, like these bananas seem to be doing here. And that was a problem, and especially if you had too many of them. And especially, farming is very cyclical. Every year you have a certain amount of crop. That really does become an issue. But what started happening is that people started cropping up and kind of trying to improve their efficiency. So you had people that would make tools, right? So a small bit of the population would start making tools. So it wasn't all about food anymore. It was now about making the farming more efficient. And as that happened, it kind of started this cycle where, okay, now, out of the 100 people, one guy's making tools, and he's making, farm equipment. And when I say farm equipment, I mean things like this that you see here, a sickle, maybe some primitive wheelbarrows or things like that to move things around. But as that happened, the farmers became more efficient, and now less people had to produce food, so then more people could produce tools, and it kind of started this cycle. But as more and more as less and less people were producing food and more people were producing other things, luxury goods kind of started being created, right? And now you went from having 20 or 30 things that people were trading commonly to hundreds of things that were being traded. And it was really hard to keep track of how many bananas were worth a berry, or how many bushels of bananas were worth a bushel of berries, or, you had a lot of complications. So people started trying to think of a way to have some sort of a medium of exchange. And they've experimented with all kinds of things in the past. One I thought was kind of interesting was cattle. And cattle makes sense. I mean, it's hard to lose cattle. It's easy to count. You don't have that many of them typically. And especially if you're not very good at counting, you can still count how many cows you have for the most part. So that was a decent one. I think the main problem with that was that your money could die or just walk away. So that was really inconvenient. Like if I had a $100 bill and just kind of walked out of the room right now, I'd probably be really upset. I wouldn't like that very much. Or if it died, that would be kind of weird too. So people experimented with all kinds of things as far as trying to find that medium of exchange. Things like seashells or little bits of metals, gold or silver or whatever, beans. Basically, anything that was somewhat scarce, so like dirt, for example, wouldn't work as a good medium of exchange, because it's like, oh, all right, I need a new car. Pick up some dirt. Here you go. It doesn't really work that way. But as time progressed and people got more advanced and money became a more key part of our society, minting kind of came out of nowhere. And so the history of minting, so this started like thousands and thousands of years ago. One of the earliest, I guess, examples of minting was actually the Greeks. So when I was reading about this, I kind of read about a whole bunch of different stuff. But the Greeks were really interesting because they actually had separate coins that they would mint depending on what city that particular thing came from, right? Or that particular coin came from. Now, I don't know if that meant that coin was only valid in that city or if that was just like an indicator of, hey, this is where it came from. But that's kind of how we got into the early money, right? But the key thing of understanding here is that money just represents value of some kind. It represents food, it represents luxury, it represents time. So as software developers, which I guess most of you probably are, being here at StirTrek, you have to kind of think about, well, how can you provide more value? And there's really two ways to go about it here. You can either try to become the guy on the left there, where you yourself are becoming better and better and providing more and more value, or you kind of start scaling outwards, where you have people that you are improving, and by improving other people and making them more efficient and more effective, you are inherently providing more value. It's kind of like this. So you can't really do a talk about this without car analogies. I'm sure everyone has seen quite a few car analogies already or will today. But you can kind of make a choice here, right? Do you want to be the super fast sports car where you can get from point A to point B really fast, faster than anyone else, but only under specific conditions? Road is straight, dry, that kind of stuff. Or do you want to just do something more like being a dispatcher for a bunch of semi-trucks, where those trucks can get everything from point A to point B and you can overall accomplish more, but it just takes you a little bit longer to get to that point. So first I want to talk about the first one here. How do you become yourself more efficient and more effective. And there's a lot of different ways of doing that. The first thing you really have to do is you have to demonstrate your value, because someone somewhere has to pay you for what you're doing. And if they don't think that you're valuable, then they're not really going to want to pay you a whole lot. And there's quite a few ways you can do that. I think one of the most important ones is to share your knowledge. So when I say share your knowledge, I'm willing to bet that every single person in this room, every single one of you, you know something valuable that no one else in the world knows. Think about that for a second. What do you know that no one else knows? Now, what if you could share that with people? Right? I mean, even in terms of programming, you probably know about some obscure library that no one knows about. Maybe you wrote some obscure library. But that's important. You need to share that knowledge and do what you can to, talk to the people around you, help the people around you. So at our office, there's only a few of us, but we're always sharing knowledge. I mean, it's not always about development-related stuff. Sometimes we talk about things that, really shouldn't be spoken about. But we always work out and, try to help each other, try to share our knowledge. So this is something that I just came up with a couple days ago. I think that you should always surround yourself with people that challenge you. So I have a friend of mine, so we actually do this workshop together, and he is someone that definitely challenges me. He is kind of the one person who really like if I say something and that something is not really accurate or it's not 100% accurate, he'll be like, no, you're wrong. And he'll challenge me to figure out what the right answer is. Even if he doesn't know what the right answer is, he will say, well, let's go figure this out together. And I think it's really important that you surround yourself with these kind of people. You don't want to just be around people where you can just make up stuff and they're like, oh, okay, that's awesome, right? You want people that will actually call you out on your BS. That's really important. And most importantly, you need to challenge yourself. So when I say challenge yourself, I mean do things that you're not comfortable doing. Do things that maybe might improve what you're trying to accomplish or get you to your goals, but are frightening or scary. Like networking events are actually one of them. Going to networking events. Like being here, I mean, if you're here alone, have you talked to anyone yet today? If not, talk to people. Talk to as many people as you can. A lot of us, being developers, we're introverts. And I'm definitely an introvert. And I, got into the community, and first time I went to an event, everyone's very welcoming, and they said hello, and I'm just like, oh, okay, what's going on? I kind of sat in the back corner and didn't talk to anyone really for the rest of the time. But I kept going, even though I was really nervous about doing it, and I just kept on going and kind of got to know a good amount of people, and I feel better about that. And also challenge yourself technically as well. So if you're doing some kind of language or something, you work in the same language all the time. Let's say, like me, I'm a C# developer. I don't do a whole lot of stuff outside of C# or web stack stuff, but I should, and you should. I challenge all of you to pick something new today, go to a session on some technology that you've never even heard of, learn it, and then just do it. And it's going to make you overall a better developer. There are other ways to challenge yourself as well. Speak. I recommend that everyone speak. So, my story behind this is that, so all through school, I was incredibly introverted. I was shy. I didn't have a lot of friends. And, all my friends became internet friends, and, we killed dragons together, and that's about it. But I kind of one day decided that maybe I should try going out there and just talking to people and just speaking in front of people. And it was a really, really scary thought. It was really frightening for me to do that. But it also shows your employer or potential employers that you have value and that you're able to share that value and that you're able to communicate at least somewhat effectively. But speaking is scary, especially when you get started for the first time. Like for me, so I got started speaking about 3 or 4 years ago, and I had been to conferences as an attendee for quite a while, and I was sitting there talking to one of my friends, and he happens to run a code camp. I think it's like in Virginia, it's in Richmond. And he suggested, I kind of told him, I was like, well, I did a lightning talk and in front of a few people, and I kind of like sharing my ideas and my thoughts. And he said, well, why don't you come submit a session and come speak at our code camp? So I said, okay, well, I'll think about it. And I ended up doing that. I ended up going there and submitting, and I was really nervous about that. I wrote up the abstract, I submitted it, off it went. A few weeks later, I got an email and said, hey, you're accepted. You're speaking in Richmond. And I was like, oh, crap. Now I got to write a talk. Oh, man. So I started writing a talk, and I mean, I wanted it to be perfect. I was so nervous about it, right? I mean, this was like, I spent like a month of my life freaking out about this thing coming up. It was like this big weight on my shoulders. And I wrote this talk. I practiced it probably 20 or 30 times. I made everyone I knew listen to it. My wife listened to it, my cat, you know, everyone. I mean, hey, like, hey cat, get back here. Don't walk out of the room. So I just did that over and over again. And the more I practiced it, the better I felt. But then I actually got to the event, and so I had like, I think I was at the second slot that day. So I scoped out my room really early in the morning. I mean, I got there really early, and I was really nervous, and scoped out the room, and I was like, oh man, this is a big room. There's like 10 chairs in here. Crap. I hope it doesn't fill up. And then I kind of just stood outside the room. You know, the first speaker of the day, he comes in, and he's in there, and I'm like, oh, watching him. What is he doing? Oh, he's plugging in his laptop. Cool. Just kind of seeing what he does. And then, you know, I just kind of went and I sat down on the couch somewhere and just kind of like mentally, like kind of prepared, like, oh man, you know, almost like hyperventilating, right? Like, oh man, this is going to be crazy. But then finally, sessions ended, people were walking about, and I'm like, all right, I'm coming up next. So I walked into the room, get up to the podium, and I'm like, all right, what do I do here? I got the connections and laptop, and you know, my bag has stuff, and everything falls out of my bag and gets all over the floor, and I'm like really nervous, and you know, knocking things off of tables and stuff, and I have no idea what I'm doing, but you know, it's also like a rush at the same time. You know, it's like you're really nervous, but you're also experiencing this rush. And then people started walking in the room, and I'm like, oh man, there's a person here. Play it cool. Play it cool, you know. And then another person came in, and before you know, there was like 8 or 9 people in there. And I was like, oh man, all right, so what do I do? And then it's like, you know, I hadn't actually thought about what to do now. Like, it's time to start. Is someone going to tell me to start? Do I just start talking? Is anyone listening? I mean, they're talking amongst themselves. Maybe I'll wait till they stop. You know, all these ideas run through your head, and you're like, well, what do you actually do here? And I just said, hello. And they all looked at me. And I'm like, so yeah, am I talking about RavenDB today? That was my talk. It was about RavenDB. I was so nervous, and fortunately I had rehearsed this thing so many times that like for the first 10 minutes I was like a zombie, right? I just like hit play. I just did my rehearsed lines, and no personality, nothing at all. Just went through and did them. But after about 10 minutes, everyone was still listening, and I think someone had even asked a question. I don't really remember that part. I didn't process that, but things were going okay, and I felt really good about it, and I just started actually thinking now about what I was doing. And I got into the code samples, and I was like, wow, you know, I can show them stuff, and someone had a question, and I was like, okay, well, let's try that. Let's try it and do it. But anyways, that was just really like a life-changing experience for me, because I went from being like completely like I would never talk in front of more than 2 people at a time to now like I can talk to, you know, I can talk to you fine folks here. And it's just something that feels really good. It's like this really great rush. So I recommend everyone speak. It's a really great way to demonstrate your value. And there's lots of places that you can speak. So Toastmasters, so I haven't personally done Toastmasters, I've just heard about it. Toastmasters is a really interesting thing where you can kind of go and just, excuse me. Try not to cough into the mic again like last year. Whew. Sorry about that. Sound effects, right? I'm not used to having mics on. I like to kind of not do the mic thing. Anyways, so Toastmasters, you do these like really short talks in front of people, and it's just like really non-threatening. And same thing like user groups, code camps, conferences. I mean, it's really non-threatening. Everyone is extremely supportive, right? Like you're not going to have anyone, like you say something, no one's going to like stand up and be like, you're full of it, right? No one's going to say that. Everyone's supportive. I mean, a couple of people might not be interested, you know, might not be what they thought it was, they might walk out of the room or whatever, but it's not a big deal. And it's just something that you can kind of get into, you can ease in, right? Find a small user group where like 5 people go and just talk about something. And if you mess up, then you know it's okay. You finish early, I mean you're done in 20 minutes, that's fine. Everyone can't wait to go have a beer anyways after user group, so you just go to the bar, you have a beer, and you're good, right? So it's just there's a lot of opportunities to speak, and I think that everyone should find those opportunities and do those. So anyways, enough about that. Now it's kind of a little bit of a detour. I like to tell stories if you can't tell. Be more effective. So it's really easy for me to just say, you know, If you're playing darts, just hit the middle every time, right? If you're playing pool, well, why don't you just get the ball in the hole, right? It's easy to say that. But how do you actually be more effective? I mean, it's easier said than done. So I have a lot of different techniques and whatever that I use. One is this, the rule of 80-20. So the rule of 80-20 is that 80% of the value that you're actually providing happens in 20% of the time, and conversely, 80% of your time is spent delivering only 20% of your value. Well, what if you could figure out how to make all your time more effective, or just don't do the 80% of the time that only does the 20% of the value? What if, so 80% of your time, or sorry, 20% of your time out of a 40-hour work week, that's 8 hours, right? Am I mathing that right? I think so. What if you only went to work for 8 hours a week, but you still provided 80% of the value? Wouldn't it be great if your employer would just pay you just 80% of your pay, and then you could just be there for 8 hours a week, come in on Mondays and, oh, see you guys next week. So that would be interesting. But, so how do you get there though? How do you do that, right? How do you figure out how to provide more value? One thing I think is very important is blocking out noise. And when I say block out noise, I mean, a lot of people in, whatever company they're in end up in like some kind of like a meeting culture, or there's an email culture, or there's some kind of a culture of like interruptions and noise. So whatever organization you're in, I think it's very important to figure out what is the signal and what is the noise. So for me, the noise a lot of times is like emails. Like I have this one person, he's not in this room fortunately, but this one person that sends me these emails that are just so long. And it's like reading a novel, seriously, every time he sends an email. But like, it's always like completely irrelevant things to what I actually need to know. So what I do with that email is I say, okay, well, he sent me an email, I'm just gonna ignore it. I know you shouldn't ignore emails, but these are really ridiculous. But I just ignore the email. And then eventually he'll call me and he'll say, hey, did you see that email? No, I don't know, what was it about? And then in about 30 seconds, he can tell me what the email was about, where I would have spent maybe half an hour trying to figure out what he's even trying to say. So that's one way you can block out noise. Just figuring out, if people are trying to communicate with you, figure out which of those communications are important. Man, I had a really good story to tell. I forgot which one I was going to say here. All right, I guess I'm going to move on then. So there's also tools. I like to use a lot of different tools because, the way my brain works, everyone's brain works a specific way, right? So this is the tool here called Trello. I don't know, anyone use Trello? A lot of people use Trello, that's awesome. Trello helps me a lot. I'm a very visual person, and also if I need to do something and I don't immediately put it down somewhere, it doesn't get done. I forget to do it. So with Trello, I can have my to-do list, my doing list, and my done list. So it's kind of like Kanban, but not really because there's no work in progress. There's a Kanban person somewhere saying, no, it's not like Kanban at all, right? Maybe like a Scrum board, I don't know. But anyways, it's a really great tool just for visualizing what all needs to be done. And then it feels good too when you can take something and say done, right? Oh, this right here, boom, done, just drag it over. That's such a great feeling. And that's one of the reasons I like using it. But sometimes though, what will happen with Trello, and this happens to me all the time, so I used to have 3 columns. I used to have do this today, do this tomorrow, and do this next week. And it ended up being the today list was stuff that I actually had to do, so that was my to-do. And then the tomorrow and next week, that just never came. Tomorrow never came. I always get into the office and say, well, it's not tomorrow, it's today. I guess I don't have to do this till tomorrow. So it ended up being things to do, I'm going to do, and then things I'm never going to get done. But at least once I realized that was happening, it was easy to kind of say, well, if I'm never going to do them, at least they're there and I know about them, but I'm not going to do them. That kind of became a revelation for me. Is that there's these things, and if I don't do them, nothing bad will happen. So I just started also using it for things I don't want to do, but I still want to know, be conscious of, but just don't do them. Post-it notes are also great, and I use Post-it notes all the time. So if I actually have I need to do 5 things or 10 things, there's kind of short things, right? Send an email, return a phone call, pay a bill, all those little tasks. What really helps me is to just get them all down on paper over the course of the day, write them onto a Post-it note, and then before I go home, I get my Post-it note out, and I get my pencil out or my pen, I sit down, and I just start doing them. And like every time I do one, I cross it off. And that physically, like writing it down and crossing it off, that does a lot for me, like mentally. It really gets me, like I feel like I've done something, right? And you get done with the list and you're like, yeah, I'm done. Throw in the trash. So that physically, like doing that really helps me. Good one. He works for me, so it's okay, I can make fun of him. Pomodoro technique. So who here has heard of, used, or whatever? About half of you. All right, so for those of you that don't know what the Pomodoro technique is, I won't talk about it for too long here. But the Pomodoro technique comes from Pomodoro timers. So I guess it's like an Italian thing where if you cook tomatoes, it takes about 25 minutes. Well, some person a long time ago, I don't know who it was, but they had the brilliant idea of kind of figuring out this method of working where you work for 25 minutes and then you just force yourself to take a break for 5 minutes. I mean, even if, in the middle of a line of code, that 25-minute timer goes off, boom, walk away. Just 5 minutes, go over here, and don't think about something totally different, right? Don't get into like a whole new thought process, but just walk away from it. And when people start doing that, they kind of realize that what actually happens is that when you walked away, if you're not doing something very mentally strenuous, your brain is still processing what you were working on in the background. So when you come back 5 minutes later and you do like another Pomodoro, you do another 25 minutes, you sit down, and a lot of times if you were stuck on something, it's like your brain has figured it out, right? Because you're giving your brain that time to just process without necessarily staring at the screen. Like get up, go to the bathroom, go get a drink, just take a walk around the office, things like that. So I don't use Pomodoro all the time though. I use Pomodoro sometimes. And I use it when I have tight deadlines, for example, because it kind of like, it forces me and it helps me organize things in the right way and do them in the right order, I guess, if that makes any sense, where I can actually get them done and get focused on them and do them and just kind of knock them out. But sometimes though, it doesn't necessarily do that. But what it does do though is helps me avoid context switching. So when I'm doing my Pomodoros, I'll usually like turn off my phone and I will kind of avoid distraction, right? I'll close email, kind of get out of that, spend that 25 minutes getting out of that, and then do the 5-minute thing. And then that 5 minutes, maybe I'll look at my phone, did anyone call me, check my texts, my emails and whatnot. But it helps me avoid that context switching. So context switching for developers is extremely costly. It's extremely difficult. Because as a developer, when you're working on a problem, and it's a tough problem to solve, you have a lot of things in your memory, like the context of what you're working on. So having to stop that and then go do something else, that takes some time to like, all right, I'm done with this thing, I'm gonna go do this now. And then you kind of have to get back into that mental state where you're productive again. Like for me, when I'm starting out on something, it might be a good half an hour before I'm really going full blast, right? So if I have to go switch back and forth all the time, that causes some problems. But there's some kind of cool tools out there that can help you with that. So this is one that really helps me. So for me, I need to get into the zone. And when I say get in the zone, I mean, well, you know what I mean. You get into that like hyper-focused, I don't care what's going on type of zone. You can code and you're like, oh man, it's 5 a.m., I should go to bed. And you just get so much done in a short amount of time. So there's a site I found, it's called Focus at Will, and it's kind of like Pandora, but so the way Pandora is music that you listen to, Focus at Will is music that you focus to. It really helps me get in the zone. And I'm sure most of you have been in the zone, you've been listening to music. Like for me, what happened, or used to happen when I used to listen to Pandora, was I would get in the zone, listen to this music, and all of a sudden the music would stop. Sometimes I'd have my headphones on for like 2 hours, or I don't even know how long, just hours. Still coding, no music playing. And then all of a sudden I'm like, that's weird. Go to Pandora and it's like, hey, are you still listening? Are you still there? Yes, I'm still here. Can you keep playing the music for me? But like that's what it is when you're in a zone. Like you don't even notice that the music has stopped. So Focus at Will is a very interesting way because you can kind of like find this music that can make you focus. So like depending on your way your brain works. Like the way my brain works, like there are certain kind of beats and stuff that like if I have those beats going, I can just get into something and like it's non-distracting. Like I don't have anyone singing. I'm like parsing words. It's just like this beat. I get into the beat, start moving, jiggling my foot or whatever, and I get into the zone. read a sales book. So every single one of you in this room is actually a salesman. Believe it or not, you are a salesperson. You have to sell yourself. When you're looking for a job, you're selling yourself. When you're creating a resume, you're basically creating a sales brochure, right? You're telling everyone in your resume, hey, this is what's great about this product. Well, I think everyone should read a sales book. And I'm intentionally not going to recommend a sales book because I think figuring out what sales book you should read is a very personal thing because everyone has a different personality. I mean, some of you are extroverted, outgoing, and you're going to get the kind of sales book that has you get the bullhorn out and yell at people, hey, hire me, right? Whereas other people have different techniques for selling. But I recommend everyone go on Amazon, go to your bookstore, go to the library, and find a book about sales that is kind of like, makes you feel good about the way that their technique is, I mean, maybe you like the picture on the cover, maybe like the little blurb on the back. Find a sales book and read it, and it will really help you in the long term. So this is what I see people messing up all the time, and I mess it up all the time. Used to be a lot worse, trying to consciously get a little better at it. But dress for the audience. So like for me, like I try to do like client meetings kind of like all in one day where I drive around town and meet all the clients. And on days I'm doing that, like I know every client's like culture. And I might drive around with like 3 or 4 different changes of clothes in the back of the car, leave the client, get in the next outfit and go to the next client. Because every client, they have their different culture about what they wear in the office. And the interesting thing is that, you think like, well, if I'm just wearing this thing, no one's gonna care. Well, some people do care about how many pieces of flair you have on, believe it or not. It can be important for some people. So just be conscious of that. You don't have to go around wearing a suit wherever you go. And actually, there's a lot of places where you don't want to wear a suit because it's not going to work out. But just think about it. Like, see, what are people wearing? What should I be wearing? And maybe even try to find outfits that are like, well, I can kind of put a suit on here with a tie. If I look in the window, oh, sorry, I'm touching the mic. If I look in the window and no one's wearing ties and they're kind of more or less formal, I can pull off the tie, undo some buttons, kind of do some stuff like that. Another thing I want to talk about is luck. So everyone talks about luck. I have people all the time like, you land a new client, you get a new job, everyone's like, oh man, you're so lucky. I don't necessarily believe in luck. I believe that luck is man-made. I mean, yes, there is a certain amount of things that you don't control that are out of your control, right? Like being born, where you were born. You were born here. You're able to come to conferences like this. But like in the terms of your career, I think that a lot of luck is man-made. Like while it is possible that you could be at home in your bathrobe and that like some guy will crash his helicopter into your house and be like, oh man, I feel really bad about that. You want to have a great job? Sure, that could happen, I guess. That could be luck. But that's not really what happens. You need to put yourself out there. If you're out there, like at things like this, when you're networking, right? I guarantee that every one of you, or out of all the people in this room, there's probably one person that's looking for a job, and there's one person that's looking for a person. Well, I'm willing to bet that there's a connection somewhere in this room. So if you talk to every single person in this room, you would probably find that opportunity that you're looking for. And that's not necessarily luck. That's just putting yourself out there and letting the luck find you, or however you want to put that. Be positive. I know some people that are just negative, negative attitudes in general, and it's not good. I mean, if you just go and you talk to people and you're like, oh, this thing sucks and I hate this, people aren't gonna, people are gonna start, I guess, associating you with those negative thoughts. And that's not something that you want to have happen. You want people to associate you as being a positive person. So even if like internally you're like, oh man, I hate everyone, I hate all these people. At least put on a smile and don't tell people that. Don't like go up to people and be like, I hate you. Say, hi, my name is. Just try to be a positive person. And if you aren't a positive person, why aren't you a positive person, right? It's just something I always like to be like. I always like to be very positive with people, like encouraging and whatnot. And I think that it helps. I think people really appreciate that as well. So one of the things so this is kind of like getting into more of other type of stuff now. One is provide value from anywhere. When I say provide value from anywhere, we're kind of like in this society with a lot of our employers where they have this belief that you can only be providing value if your butt is in that chair right there from 9 to 5. And as developers, I mean, that's not really true. I mean, sure, there are careers out there, like let's say you're a zookeeper. You really can't feed the animals without being where the animals are, right? And I don't think they're gonna let you take an elephant home from work just so you can take care of it at home. But as a developer, you can in most cases provide value from anywhere. So if you can kind of like dissociate yourself or detach your providing value from your location, that's kind of like a good first step towards maybe even being able to start a business or go independent or something along those lines. Because now you're not physically needing to be somewhere. And then once you're able to do that, once you're able to break that bond, you can then take it a step further. So this is actually really interesting because, so for example, if you're able to work for a company, so there's like economic arbitrage, I guess you could say. There are some places in this country, like Manhattan, where as a developer, if you get a job working at one of those companies, they're going to pay you 4 times as much as what they're paying you out here just because you're there. So what if you were able to get a job for one of those companies, then translate to like not working from home, or sorry, not working there, but working from home, and then you take it a step further, now you're working on a beach in some country where the US dollar is very strong. Well, now you could effectively have tens or 20, 30, 40 times the spending power. So that means you could kind of get to a point where you're working for a couple hours a week and just not really having to work that hard and having a lot more free time to do what you want to do. So there's a book, I'll talk about the book kind of at the end, but there's a book, actually I don't think I have a slide for it because I wasn't going to talk about it, but I think I'll mention it anyways. It's a book called The 4-Hour Workweek, and I'll look it up on Amazon after here, but it's a book that kind of talks about this, about like separating your location and kind of getting to the point where you don't necessarily have to work as much or as hard to still get that value. And you end up really focusing on that free time and the things you want to do. You can focus on being with your family or killing dragons, I mean, whatever your thing is, But to even get to that point, where you're having other people do things for you, though, you have to learn to delegate. And this is actually very hard to do. So this is something that I had challenges with, especially at the start. When I started my business, I was it, right? So when I had to get to the point where I had other people now doing things, that was really hard to do. The hardest part wasn't even paying them. It was the letting go. Like I had, software I've been writing for my clients for years, packages I had been maintaining for a long time. Those are my babies, right? It's really hard to let someone else, hand over the keys and say, yeah, here, you maintain it now. This is yours. So if you can find ways to kind of learn to let go and allow other people to help you and be involved in those problems and even take over some of the things that you're used to doing, that will be a very good thing. And that's something that I think everyone has to learn. So there's a couple ways you can kind of go about moving yourself into a career or moving your career into a way where you're not necessarily the one doing the work anymore. I mean, you're still coding if that's what you want to do, but you're not, you're able to spread your value amongst other people. And one way is to become an architect. So that's kind of like my path that I took. I started architecting applications and not necessarily writing applications. So when I say become an architect, I mean, let's say you have, especially now with the cloud, you have all these different ways of architecting cloud applications. You have queues and you have all these, distributed systems. So I started thinking about these systems in like these large macro views. So I get into flowcharts. So again, I'm very visual, right? So I get these big flowcharts, I get in the whiteboard and start mapping these things out. And then once I have the system mapped out, I don't actually necessarily go implement it anymore. I say, okay, well, this piece over here, well, this is the data layer. Where's Brian? He's the data guy. Hey, he's in here, cool. So it's like, I kind of get to the point where like, I don't want to do data anymore. I don't want to do these things anymore. I still want to be involved though, but like I kind of take that and I start spreading my value, or my value is these, architecting these systems and kind of allowing more value to be provided in the aggregate than I can provide alone. or then all of us together can provide individually. So this one, I think a lot of people are going to hate me for this next line, because this is something that like no one ever wants to do this, right? Become a manager. That's like an ugly word around developers, right? Because if you're getting up into your career, your boss at some point is going to say, hey, so can't pay you anymore for writing code, but you want to manage someone? Most people don't want to become a manager, but consider that being a manager might be a step towards what you actually want to do and where you actually want to get to, right? I mean, everyone, I guess if you want to get to a certain point, is going to have to manage someone at some point. So it's an important skill is to learn how to become an effective manager. But when I say become a manager, I'm not saying like, stop writing code and then you're going to do management for the rest of your life. No, it might be a stopgap, right? Do some coding, do some managing, but do it with the goal of getting past that at some point, right? So like right now I do a lot of management, but I don't necessarily want to be a manager. One day I hope to hire a manager that will manage me and tell me what to do, and I'll just write code all day. That'll be great. But that way it's like, I would still kind of have that, I would still have that owner thing where I'm the owner of the company, but I have someone still telling me what to do. So I don't know, it's just an interesting way, and I kind of have these like weird things I think about, and that's one of them. But I think that would be awesome. I mean, wouldn't it be cool to own your own, like, so think about the corporation or wherever you're working right now. Wouldn't it be great if you owned it, but like your job didn't change, right? You kept writing code all day. That would be interesting. But when you get to that point, when you have hired your own manager, you don't necessarily need to write code all day. You can do things that you find fascinating or interesting or whatever your hobbies are, right? So whether that's killing dragons, like my hobby used to be, now it's more like my family, right? So I have a son who's almost 2, and like for me, a lot of that is getting to the point where like I don't get home at like 7. I want to get home at 3. I want to hang out with him. I want to go do things with him, and that's really important for me is like that family time. But really, the thing to keep in mind here is that you should always have a goal in mind. So whatever it is that you're going to do or you want to do, have a goal in mind. Figure out what it is that you want to do. Maybe you are doing what you want to do. Maybe you're already, like maybe you want to write code all day, you want to be somewhere from 9 to 5, and that's what you're doing. If that's your goal, that's fantastic. It doesn't matter what your goal is. It's just that you should be aware of what that goal is and do things that move you towards that goal. And this next one, this is a really important one. Fail. Failure is extremely important. I think everyone needs to fail. Because by failing, you learn. You learn from that. So I've had businesses, I had a couple businesses actually where I got into them, totally bombed. Didn't work out at all. But I feel like every time I do something that's not successful, that's like one step closer than I am to the next success. And that's kind of what I always try to get to. I always try to like get to that point where I have gotten to that next success, right? And if there's 10 failures between me and the next thing that's going to work out, I need to fail right now. I need to go start failing, I need to go design things like this. That's an easy way to fail, because I'm not much of a designer. I probably would make something like this. Get your dimensions off a little bit. So anyways, I hope that something that I said in this room has resonated with you. And hopefully, my perspective, kind of my odd perspective on things, can help someone out. Everyone loves cats, so I thought I'd throw a little cute cat picture in here. Funding cat pictures is kind of like this thing on Reddit, so it's kind of like this online thing or whatever. But anyways, I really hope that you all can take something from what I have to say. And if you have any questions or whatever, you can always come find me. I'll be around all day. Thank you.